Today's video is a real burner. If you've watched our channel before, you know we always ask for you to subscribe. I thought it may be a good idea to tell you why this is important to us. Your subscription to our channel tells YouTube that we have people interested in what we are doing and that our channel has value. So, please subscribe if you haven't already. Also, to make it easier, we've now added a subscribe button. It's the red button in the lower left corner of this video. Right there. Now on to our story. My good friend Joseph M. Getsinger is an artist, photographer, and author. He has created over 250 prints and paintings, including the artwork for my book, R.I.P. Chief Taylor. As a former New Jersey State police officer, much of his art has focused on police and fire subject matter. As an author, his book, The Lost Work of Will Eisner, details the pre-World War II work of this famous cartoonist under the pen names of Carl Heck and Willis B. Renzi. You can purchase this book and check out Joe's other work at the website www.jgetsinger.com. Today, we're reading Joe's real-life short story from his days as a state police arson investigator called Charred, Woodland. On my way to breakfast one morning, I noticed several fire trucks, firefighters, and police at the Woodland Family Restaurant. The restaurant was a large red barn type structure. Of course, my curiosity piqued, and the New Jersey State Police arson investigator in me took over. I pulled over. I recognized Woodland Fire Chief Ron Thomas, who invited me into the scene. He wanted to give me a tour of the building and get my opinion. A Woodland police lieutenant at the scene also accompanied us. The Chester County Prosecutor's Office investigator, Lou Glosnick, was also there. He came up and said, "What the hell are you doing here? This is going to wind up being an accidental fire." I felt a challenge coming on, so I said, "Really? What do you think happened here?" He replied, "It was probably an electrical fire that started over there," pointing to wires stretching from floor to ceiling near the breaker panel. I told him the wires burned and shorted after the fire started, because the intensity of the fire was in the center of the floor in the restaurant, some 20 feet away. There was a 16-foot hole in the middle of the floor, and even the joists and flooring had been totally consumed in the fire. At that point, it became sort of a duel, with him saying, "It was a faulty gas line," and pointed to a gas line that had burst during the fire, some 20 feet away from the hole in the floor. I thought that he was not sure what occurred and was testing me for my expertise to help him decide what really happened. He knew I didn't agree with his joking claim that it was electrical or a leaky gas line. He walked away, mumbling, and joined the other investigators at the scene. The Chester County prosecutor did not care much for arson investigations. I think his distaste for arson investigations may have been based on a fire which occurred in an apartment building he owned many years before. I happened to have investigated that fire and determined it to have been intentionally set. You might say he wasn't fond of me or interested in any arson cases. The fire chief told me that they had to make a forced entry since the building was locked down. His men were initially fighting the fire in the lower office and storage area of the restaurant. The fire was so intense in the lower area that he called the firefighters out of the building just before the floor above collapsed into that area. He said he had noticed the smoke changed and felt it may be breaking through the floor above. He was relieved when the firefighters got out with no injuries when the floor collapsed. I would later use that information to assist me in determining the cause and origin of the fire. So, after having a conversation with the Woodland fire chief and the Chester County prosecutor's office detective, I left for my duty assignment. The next morning, I stopped at the Woodland Police Department to check in with Leo, the lieutenant, out of curiosity to see how the investigation was going. He said the Woodland County prosecutor's detectives listed the fire as undetermined and released it to his local authority. The lieutenant asked for my assistance in determining the cause and origin of the fire. I called into my supervisor, who authorized me to assist with the local department. Because the fire scene was left unsecured, we were granted a search warrant to enter the scene. We photographed the scene and started an examination of the building and damage caused by the fire. Basic fire investigations reveal that fire burns up and out in a V pattern unless an accelerant is used or stored in the area. There are always telltale signs at the scene, but you must get into the debris and excavate it as you would in an archaeological dig, taking out layer upon layer. Everything kept coming back to that big gaping hole in the middle of the restaurant floor. On the edge of the hole, under the floor, was a 16-inch steel I-beam which ran front to rear of the building. This beam had warped from the fire. That indicated an intense amount of heat under the floor. If the fire had started on the restaurant floor, it would not have caused so much damage to the joist below or the steel beam. At that point, I was convinced the fire started in the office and storage area in the basement. Examination of the debris revealed there were wooden tables located under the floor which held paper products for the restaurant. When we located the joist sections that supported the floor, we discovered that they were charred completely through. This was an indication that the fire was intense and accelerated and consumed all the joists and floor above. Again, this gave us more physical evidence of how the 16-inch steel I-beam became warped. We were able to eliminate any accidental causes in this area with lack of electrical wiring, electrical devices, and natural gas-fired appliances. With all the paper products stored in this area, all anyone needed to do was pour an accelerant over the paper products and ignite it. An accelerant would most likely be gasoline, but sometimes alcohol or kerosene could be used. Most likely, the fire wouldn't have been noticed outside the building until it broke through the floor. The lieutenant said about a month or so before the fire, they had evacuated the restaurant due to the smell of gasoline throughout the building. The owner told the police that he had brought in a can of gasoline to pour into the grease traps to clean them out, and spilled a little bit on the floor near his office. A couple of drops of gasoline can really stink up a room or a building. This was obviously a lame excuse for bringing in gasoline to a commercial building, since there were many less dangerous drain cleaners on the market that he could have used. We requested another state police detective, Ken Shee, to bring in his arson dog. Ken took his dog throughout the building and around the grease traps, but it did not hit on anything. We even used a battery-powered hydrocarbon detector, which also did not hit on the grease traps, putting the owner's statement in question. I collected some of the charred wood near the origin of the fire and sealed them in metal gallon unused paint cans to be submitted to the New Jersey State Police Laboratory for analysis. It was interesting that I searched throughout the debris and could not find one piece of the joist that wasn't burned through. We would have to wait a couple of weeks for the results while we continued our investigation. We were now at the phase of interviewing witnesses and doing background investigations. First, we wanted to find out how the fire was detected and who called it in. A woman who lived in an apartment next to the building said she smelled smoke at approximately 12:30 a.m. She thought it was coming from her heater. She called a local heating and air conditioning business. As the technician started to knock on her door, he noticed smoke billowing out of the restaurant. The technician happened to be a member of the local fire department. He drove to the firehouse about 2 blocks away and sounded the alarm with the 911 center at 12:45 a.m. The police contacted the owner's parents, who he lived with, to notify them of the fire at the restaurant. By coincidence, I received a call from a police officer from a local department south of the scene. He knew of the fire and thought he remembered something strange the night of the fire. He advised that he was driving by about 11:20 p.m. and noticed a white Suburban backed up to the building. The description of this vehicle exactly matched the restaurant owner's, right down to the blue decal on the door. He didn't see anyone around the vehicle or see any smoke or fire. This was another important part of the investigation, possibly placing the owner at the scene prior to the fire. The lieutenant who was working the case advised that he had frequented the restaurant and noted there was a large collection of Snow Babies collectibles figurines in the lobby. The collection was not found during the investigation of the scene. There was not much damage in the main entrance, so the Snow Babies should still have been there, unless someone removed them before the fire. Sometimes people committing arson will remove certain items of value or personal items such as family pictures, paintings, valuable items or collectibles before setting a fire. The insurance company sent one of their investigators out to examine the scene and work with local law enforcement to determine what happened. In this case, the insured had increased the insurance coverage from $100,000 to $435,000 18 days before the fire and added business interruption insurance. The owner's insurance agent told us the owner asked him a few weeks prior to the fire if he could get coverage on some rotting timbers on the building if he reported to the police that some juveniles had damaged them. He wanted the insurance company to pay for the repair. The agent told him that would be insurance fraud. He didn't hear from him anymore. The morning of the fire, about 3:20 a.m., the local detectives interviewed the owner about the fire. He admitted that he was at the restaurant late Sunday evening and left at about 12:10 a.m. He stated, "Why would I burn my business when I was approved for a small business administration loan?" With that information, we contacted the accountant who was assisting the owner with his SBA loan. He advised that the owner was given advice as to what he needed to submit. This was a list of about 13 items, along with a deposit of $1,500 to start the process. The accountant advised that he only received a few documents from the owner, and the owner never paid him the processing fee. Therefore, the owner lied to the detective that morning about being approved for an SBA loan. A waitress who worked at the restaurant said the business was going downhill. Many suppliers were not delivering due to the owner's failure to pay bills. Before the fire, she was giving customers milkshakes in 2 paper cups since the larger cups were not being delivered. She also recalled the day the building had to be evacuated due to the smell of gasoline. She added that she had not been paid for the last 2 weeks of working at the restaurant and didn't expect to see any funds from the owner. We also found that the owner's father had lent him $100,000 for the mortgage and to make improvements on the building and catch up on payroll. The state police laboratory results came in on the debris collected at the scene. Unfortunately, there were no flammable hydrocarbons, gasoline, found in the specimens. But that isn't unusual. I may have picked the wrong samples, or the accelerant was consumed in other materials in that location. The perpetrator may have used alcohol or another accelerant which would not come up on the laboratory tests. The fact of the matter is, the fire in this area had to be accelerated to cause that type of damage. A 16-foot hole in the floor and a warped I-beam. At that point, the lieutenant and I felt it was time to speak with someone from the Chester County Prosecutor's Office. Assistant Prosecutor Wayne Johns gave us an audience, and after going through all the facts of the case, he felt he had probable cause to charge the owner with arson. The lieutenant and I arrested the owner, advised him of his rights according to the Miranda warning. He did not want to speak with us except in the presence of his attorney. He later waived his preliminary hearing, and we prepared for a grand jury hearing. After a few weeks, we received a copy of a memorandum to the prosecutor from the first assistant prosecutor. In the memo, the first assistant prosecutor stated that he reviewed the file and felt that while involvement of the owner was very suspicious, the state has insufficient evidence based on the reports to warrant a criminal charge. The reports show that the cause of the fire is unknown. Nothing was mentioned as to an accelerant in the area in which it is perceived that the fire began. While evidence shows that the defendant had a motive to set the fire, in that he had severe business problems and also had increased his insurance almost double 18 days before the fire, it should be noted that the defendant had applied for a small business loan, which appeared to have been approved. That would have corrected his immediate business problems. This was laughable. The SBA information was in the report, but was ignored or never read by the first assistant prosecutor. He continued to state in his memo that, further, someone involved in the refinancing of the Small Business Administration loan had advised the owner that the property should be insured for the amount the insurance that he, in fact, increased it to. I personally interviewed the accountant, and at no time did he suggest that the owner should increase the amount of insurance he had on the building. The prosecutor wraps up his memo by stating, finally, the owner's vehicle was seen approximately an hour or so before the fire started at the scene, and a police officer on routine patrol appeared to have seen a vehicle which matched the general description of the owner's vehicle. Approximately 40 minutes or less prior to the notice of the fire, backed up to the restaurant. However, that description was not accurate enough to conclude that he did, in fact, observe the vehicle of the owner. It should be noted that there is no other evidence that I could perceive that the fire was in fact an arson, and even if it was an arson, that there would be sufficient circumstantial evidence that a prima facie case could be made against the owner. The officer patrolling the area arrived at the scene at 12:47 a.m. and found the building to be fully engulfed in flames. This would indicate that the fire, which started in the basement, would have been burning for some time before being seen in the restaurant area. The owner had told the detective at the scene that he had been at the restaurant late the night before. All the previously mentioned facts would place him at the scene when the fire would have been started. The prosecutor knew that I was qualified in several counties as an expert in arson investigations. I didn't need to show what exact accelerant was used just to testify to the physical damage to the building was caused by an accelerant. It was not only my professional opinion as an arson investigator, but that of my partner, Ken, with the arson dog, the lieutenant of the police department, and the insurance company investigator. In my report, I concluded that this fire was intentionally set with the aid of an accelerant to cause the damage viewed. After receiving this outrageous memo from the prosecutor's office, I met with my supervisor, Lieutenant Torrance. I explained the circumstances to him and asked permission to meet with an attorney with the New Jersey Attorney General's office. I made an appointment and met with an Assistant Attorney General, Michael Stiles, and presented the case to him. Upon completion, he was excited about the case and said it was a slam dunk, determining it to be an arson, placing the owner at the scene just prior to the fire, and proving intent with the increase of the insurance coverage along with a couple of extras. He advised me he would read more thoroughly on the case and set up a state grand jury hearing on the case. After weeks, no one had called me. I called the Assistant Attorney General. Stiles said, "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but the Attorney General reviewed the case and sent it back to your county for prosecution." From the tone of his voice, I felt he didn't agree with the Attorney General. I figured the local prosecutor somehow, politically, got to the Attorney General to get the case back, so he wouldn't be embarrassed about not prosecuting it. I was beyond furious, but knew that I had to go back again to the Chester County prosecutor. It took me a few weeks of phone calls to get an appointment with the prosecutor, and he had his assistant prosecutor speak with me instead. He said, "I know why you're here, and I have to say that since the insurance company paid off the owner, we don't have much of a case to prosecute, and we're not going to do it." I couldn't believe that the insurance company would pay off the case. The investigator who worked with us on the scene said they would not pay the owner based on the investigation. Something had gone very wrong with the insurance company. I contacted the insurance investigator, Ray Moss. He told me that his company had recently lost an arson case in court and had to pay triple damages. It was easier to pay off the owner than to fight it in court with the possibility of losing. Ray was about as disgusted as I was, but he had to listen to his bosses and move on to the next case. It was the end of the line for my hard work to build a slam dunk win for the insurance company. Not to mention that arson is a crime and the law should be upheld. I have thought about that arson case every time I drive by the former Woodlands restaurant. My blood pressure has recovered, but my outrage remains to this day.